Right, well, here we are. It's Saturday. And I'm thinking about making Saturday drives and videoing them a thing. Not completely sure whether I'm going to do it or not, but at least it's entering the realm of possibility. One of the reasons is Saturday is about the only chance I have to set aside some time and think, and occasionally I guess some of the things that I'm thinking about I want to be able to say, and this is about the only chance I have to say it. So you're getting my thoughts in a more raw format, because I haven't had really too much of a chance to go through them and parse through it, but we'll give it a shot. There's one major point that I'd like to make today, and it's why Jordan Peterson frustrates me, and why I'm frustrated by Jordan Peterson. And the other point I'm going to be making is one that essentially contends for the idea that we are all religious. So, to begin with, what frustrates me about Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is the emergence of Jordan Peterson as a public figure is a consequence of fatherhood being, well, in a pretty wretched state in the West. Jordan Peterson has gotten the attention that he has gotten, and the following that he has gotten, the video views, the book purchases, the tours, because he's the only person for many people that has said the things that have traditionally been within the realm of things that fathers teach their children. And in one sense, I'm very thankful for him, because no one can be a dad to everybody, but even just a little bit of a pulling in the right direction has dramatic results. But one of the issues that I have with Jordan Peterson is a lot of people, along with taking the very many good things that he says, they swallow his whole worldview along with it. And however much people may say otherwise, I'm going to maintain that Jordan Peterson's worldview is one that is largely secular and largely humanistic. And therefore, I believe that Jordan Peterson's worldview ultimately is bound to result in disappointment. Granted, it's orders of magnitude better than nihilism and totalitarianism, and a great deal of the crap that has been perpetrated throughout the 20th century. But I think that in certain aspects, Peterson misses the point, and I'd like to, in my own small way, hope to fill in some of the gaps that he's left and correct some of the errors that I see with what he says and does. The first error that I see is that he essentially presumes Nietzsche's conclusion to be right, Nietzsche's predominant message to be right, in other words. I personally agree Nietzsche's idea that somehow modernism has gone and killed God in the eyes of popular culture. And as a consequence, people become nihilistic or totalitarian because they either become hopeless or they want something to be able to trust in that will go and assuage their woes, let's say, or help them to not need to take responsibility for everything. And Nietzsche's views, Nietzsche's understanding of the matter was quite horribly demonstrated with the advent of Nazism and of socialism in the 20th century. One is some sort of white, blue-eyed, blonde ethnocentrism, and the other is the idea of radical, forced egalitarianism. And Peterson rightly understands this is something to be concerned about, something to be, well, you don't want to repeat what happened in the Soviet Union throughout the 20th century. The massacre of millions of people by the state is something that I would think should be avoided. Now, if you're absolutely hateful and you want to see death and destruction, then sure. Send people to the gulags like the Soviets did. Send people to the gas chambers like Hitler did. I mean, that is the natural consequence of this self-hating, destructive worldview that generally has no hope. But what bothers me about Peterson is that he essentially claims to have a handle on or an understanding of the role that religion plays in history. And not only the historical role, but also the psychological role. And then he goes back to Jung and to archetypes. And the one particular archetype, there are many that I could choose, but one particular archetype that really bothers me, that he claims that Jung is a genius to have discovered, which I think is a load of horse crap. I mean, don't get me wrong, Jung isn't exactly a dum-dum, but you don't need to be a genius to somehow be able to come to his conclusions, especially because I'm pretty sure that they're wrong. But the idea is that we latch on to these archetypes as the superlative form of, well, in the case of, say, Jesus, which is the instance that bothers me, some sort of a truth that transcends communication in any other means other than, say, living out a story. Then there's this idea that the point of Jesus is living out this archetype of the man who did everything right and then willingly assumed onto his shoulders the greatest amount of suffering humanly imaginable, and transcended it all by shouldering the cross and dying. And Peterson never mentions the resurrection as a part of the Christianity as if it's some sort of an actual, tangible, real thing. In fact, doesn't even talk about Jesus as necessarily any more real, except in the sense that Jesus somehow is an archetype. And so Peterson gets all wrapped up in this idea of Jungian archetypes, and then is trying to analyze all these ancient stories for truths that can be abstracted, because at least based upon what I see from him, he kind of has bought into Nietzsche's idea that God is dead, but somehow religion serves a purpose, so we need to go and figure out what that purpose is so that we can go and essentially deify ourselves and turn into the people that are moving and changing and doing everything to make the world better. But that's not what Christianity teaches. It's a gross misrepresentation of Christianity. And as a Christian, I take offense. Christianity is, in pretty much every way imaginable, considerably more absurd of an idea than that. Specifically because, A, it actually presumes the existence of God. Christianity presumes the existence of God. Whereas Jordan Peterson will say, well, who dares say that he believes in God? And is there anything closer to believing than acting as if there were one? So Peterson dodges the question as to whether or not he believes that there is a God, because he says, okay, I just act like there were some sort of a God. But then that also raises the question, okay, what kind of a God are you acting as if there were? And invariably it's some nebulous deity that's more a figment of the imagination than an actual God. But I'm not entirely convinced that he actually believes that God exists. He just doesn't see any other way out of the mess that we're in other than to somehow try to behave as if God exists, whatever that means. But Christianity flat out just starts with the assumption that God exists. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So it presumes God's existence. It presumes God's preeminence over everything that exists, because before there was anything, there was God. So God somehow transcends time and all the rest of these things. Okay, so that's a whole lot more absurd when we're thinking about this from a humanist perspective, especially a naturalistic humanistic perspective. But I'm not a naturalist. I don't believe that everything that is real can be seen. And I'm not a humanist. I'm a Christian. And whereas I believe there are many good things that humans can do, my hope is not in humanity. And that's another thing about Christianity. Real Christians do not place their hope in human beings. But Jordan Peterson seems to think that somehow we can transcend our suffering by taking responsibility. And that's the big message that he has to bring. And taking responsibility in and of itself is not a bad thing. But Christians would say that you take responsibility for loving your neighbor. And you love God and you love your neighbor, and that's kind of your role in the world. And that can be pretty nicely delineated by the Ten Commandments in terms of how it is you're supposed to love God and your neighbor. So, now given all that, if you take a Petersonian view of the world, you're just not gonna come up with this sort of a thing. I mean, the Christian perspective is I believe that I cannot by my own reason or strength believe in my Lord Jesus Christ or come to him. It's very close to Calvinism. It isn't Calvinism necessarily. But there is this idea of original sin which we cannot escape. We are completely helpless to escape. So that means anything good that comes from us is actually a gift from God, including the belief in God. And there's also the idea that I am the vine and you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Okay, so there's this basic idea that anything that is truly good comes from God. Also, there is a proverb that says God allows rain to fall on the just and on the unjust. So there are all sorts of things to help us subsist that aren't necessarily contingent upon us being somehow good. So now that we've somewhat scratched the surface of that whole general topic, there's one other thing that I think needs to be brought up regarding Jordan Peterson. And it's very, very dangerous, especially for those on the right. Especially for those on the Christian right that listen to him. Because he's hijacked many of the teachings of Christianity to suit his own secular humanistic worldview. And he's touting them as, well, about as close to absolute truth as you can get. He said, well, I've gone and I've analyzed all these things to the nth degree. And it's like, yeah, he might be a smart guy. He might have figured out a few things, but he definitely hasn't conducted as thorough of analysis as possible. In fact, I would be willing to bet you that he hasn't even cracked open a Book of Concord. Which, I mean, you can't exactly blame him, but it does provide a very good, internally consistent framework for understanding the world and a lens for basically reviewing reality. Christians don't hope in this world getting better. Christians view this world getting better as an occasional pleasant side effect of doing the right thing. There's a very big difference in between an occasional pleasant side effect of doing the right thing and having it be the end of reality. Jordan Peterson's essentially saying, okay, the end of the world, the things the goal of the world is to do things that minimize needless suffering. And that's the highest thing to which we can aspire. And I was like, well, that's pretty close, actually. That's pretty close to being right. I'll grant you that there's some amount of truth to that. But with that having been said, the Bible's very clear that, loving your neighbor is kind of the way to conduct yourself appropriately. And if you view things through the lens of loving your neighbor, sometimes things will work out and other times they won't. But the responsibility is never on you, the Christian, to guarantee a particular set of results. The responsibility is always on God to guarantee the results. And the command is for you to do the right thing. And of course, it's impossible to do the right thing all the time. If you think that it's possible, just examine your life for the next 20 minutes and see if there is some good that you could be doing that you weren't doing, or some bad that you are doing that you shouldn't be doing. Christians are absolved from the responsibilities of their actions, or the responsibilities of the consequences of their actions, but the consequences, especially as they're bad, serve as reminders and serve as indicators that things are, well, at least to some extent right, but then to another extent nowhere near as right as they could be. It's a miracle that the lights are on. It's a miracle that I'm going past a telephone pole, an electric pole every 60 yards or so. It's a miracle that there are all these houses standing next to where I'm driving. It's a miracle that there are all these roads. It's a miracle that society exists and we haven't all killed each other. But then it's horrible that things aren't as good as they can be. It's horrible that there are wars. It's horrible that we hate each other. It's horrible that we behave inappropriately. It's horrible that we treat other people as means and not ends in and of themselves. And the Christian would say, well, the good is the consequence of everything having been made good, and the bad is the consequence of sin having been injected into the universe. And that sin itself is powerful enough to actually set the entire universe off kilter. Okay, that's another one of the absurdities of Christianity that Jordan Peterson would explain away as a metaphor, but Christians kind of take as a reality. That sin is actually horrible and destructive and can tangibly ruin the universe. That death is a consequence of sin, for example. Now, I'm not sure what that means in the context of, say, plants or whatever, but definitely the death of things that have breath, let's say, are or is a consequence of sin. On sounding like a broken record, but it really does bother me. It bothers me to a great extent that Jordan Peterson essentially claims to have a monopoly on a proper understanding of Christianity, and then goes and tries to explain it all away as an archetype or a metaphor. Like, he realizes that getting rid of Christianity outright is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, Nietzsche goes and makes a point, whether I completely agree with it or not, I don't, but that the only reason that religion exists is basically for people to exercise their will to power. And you're stupid and buying into other people's illegitimate authority over you if you buy into religious structures that are predicated upon some sort of superstition. And I would say that Peterson probably says, yeah, there's actually utility to these, but the utility is entirely humanistic in nature and entirely explained by the fact that, or the idea that those who had religion wound up being more fruitful and multiplicative than those who didn't, and that it was a good societal construct. And so we need to just keep those elements that are good societal constructs and kind of cast everything else into a mist so that we don't offend people and just go, well, all these things are just archetypes and metaphors. So Peterson is, perhaps not by his own admission, but due to the downstream consequences of the things that he says. Remarkably anti-Christian. And it pains me to see many Christians buying into what he says without taking careful inventory of what it is that he says and perhaps mining out the gold and getting out the silver and removing the dross, let's say. So that's the first topic that was bothering me. The second topic is kind of a segue into the third. The second topic is, well, what is a Christian's hope, if not in making this world better? And the answer is quite simply, if we believe what the Christian church has taught for the past 2,000 years or so, almost for the past 2,000 years or so, the resurrection of the dead is our hope. Our hope is that death is only sleep. Our hope is that the dead in Christ will rise first, and we will all be changed. And come into full experience of life everlasting. So our hope isn't in somehow transforming this world to be permanently better by ourselves. Our hope is in God doing that on Judgment Day. Which is, well, to many people, quite a blasphemous idea, especially to secular humanists, naturalists. Anyhow, the third point that I was going to make is that we all, regardless of what our religion is, are, in the most fundamental sense, religious. And I'm going to steal a bit more from Martin Luther here. When he explains the first commandment. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods. You shall have no other gods. And that's an interesting one. That's a really interesting one. But the explanation, what does this mean, is we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. So, hidden therein is the definition of God. God is, to us, that in whom we place our trust, that whom or which we fear, and that whom or which we love. So, when talking about gods other than God, you can figure out what those are for you, or for me, by answering the question, what do you fear, what do you love, and what do you trust? And if you start with what do you love, well, that's pretty easy. For many people, that's their family. For many people, that's themselves. You gotta love yourself. You gotta love you gotta love your family. I love my kids. And to a certain extent, it's a very, very good thing. But if it's, and all I love my wife. If it's an all-consuming love, then all of a sudden I've gone and deified my spouse. If I love myself, then all of a sudden I've gone and deified myself. So, in whom or in what do you trust? Will you trust, say, the sun's going to rise every morning? Or rather, the earth is spinning on its axis. It's okay, so I worship the sun. You know, people celebrate the solstices. People celebrate the equinoxes. People celebrate all these sorts of things. And don't realize that if you're celebrating them for their own sake, it's probably because, you know, there's something captivating about the turn of the seasons and something captivating about the passage of time, and all of the markers associated therewith are well, can easily become elevated to the level of a deity. Lots of people would say, oh, I don't trust anybody. I only trust myself. You only can trust number one, right? Well, that goes and shows a sense of self-deification. But if we get to the real point, okay, what do you fear? At least for me, one of the big ones that I fear is loss of self-respect, and to a lesser extent, loss of respect amongst others. Another thing I fear is dying a painful death. Another thing I fear is having my family die before me, or having my family die in a tragic way and have there be nothing I can do about it. I fear someday that on account of, say, maybe my faith, or maybe on account of my political views, or maybe on account of many things, that someone's going to eventually, probably some government official, or police, or army person is going to knock on my door and point an assault rifle at me. Because what I believe doesn't line up. You know, I'm whatever the cultural Marxist or postmodernist or humanist or moral relativist or totalitarian or destructive nihilist definition of an infidel is. And those are all things that are concerning me that would indicate that I have a God other than God. So that's, you know, breaking of the first commandment, which is not a good thing. And that's why, as a Christian, you constantly go back and you're like, yeah, there are all these different things that I'm doing that are contrary to the will of God. Lord, have mercy on me. And I'm sure you'll find that there are things that you fear and things that you love and things that you trust, and those things are the things that you deify. Those are the things that have you by the balls. Those are the things that are integral in dictating your life's choices. So, if you think that you're not religious, think again. You may not worship in a church. There are runners that I know that profess to worship in the church of the long run, right? They go on their 3-hour-long runs on Sunday. There are people that worship at movies or at video games or in front of their TV. There are people that worship knowledge in and of itself. There are people that put certain things on a pedestal. And at any other point in history, that would be understood as worship. But now there's this pseudo-intellectual idea stemming from a false sense of intellectual superiority that, oh no, I don't believe in a God. Only stupid people believe in gods. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. So yeah, that's one of the big things that bothers me, is that the, shall we say, the trademarked intellectual elite essentially claim to have a cornerstone on all knowledge and wisdom. And, well, their epistemology is pretty straightforward, very easy to understand, but I'm getting to the point where I'm running out of time, and so I'll let you know that next Saturday the subject is going to be on 3 different types of epistemology. We can talk about pre-modern epistemology, modern epistemology, and postmodern epistemology. So if you are interested in doing a little bit of reading up on that prior to watching my next Saturday's video, go ahead and do that. You'll probably find many more resources than that which I'm going to attempt to amass for next week, and hopefully we'll be able to have a fruitful time to think about it all. As for this upcoming week, I hope it goes well for you guys. I'm thankful that you take the time to watch these videos, and I look forward to any likes and comments that you have, and if you feel like this is something you'd like more of, then also feel free to subscribe. Like, comment, and subscribe. Yeah, those are the things I'm supposed to suggest. Other than that, I'm about ready to go home and have some dinner with the family and enjoy the many blessings of which I've been reminded quite a bit recently, given that Thanksgiving was 2 days ago. So thank you guys, great audience, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.